There are films that entertain you, and then there are films that mark you forever. Boyz n the Hood is the second kind. Today you'll discover 12 revelations that will completely change how you see this masterpiece. The real dangers on set, the secrets behind the casting, and one jaw-dropping bonus at the end that absolutely nobody talks about. So stay close, because the list starts right now. Number 1. The father was only 7 years older than the son. When you watch Lawrence Fishburne as Furious Styles, you feel the weight of decades. He carries himself like a man who has survived multiple lifetimes. He speaks about property ownership, systemic racism, and personal responsibility with authority that only comes from years of hard lessons. He is one of the most convincing father figures in American cinema history. So here's the fact that should floor you. Lawrence Fishburne was only 7 years older than Cuba Gooding Jr. when they made this film. 7 years. The kind of gap between college roommates, not between a seasoned father and his teenage son. Fishburne was 29 during production. Cuba Gooding Jr. was 22. In any other context, these two men could have been going to the same parties and talking about the same things. Instead, one was delivering some of the most father-coded dialogue in cinema history, while the other played his kid who needed saving. Think about what Furious Styles is supposed to represent. A man who spent years accumulating hard-won wisdom, transforming his mistakes into lessons for his son. His speeches about black economic power feel like they came from 30 years of lived experience. How does a 29-year-old make you believe all of that? Pure talent, and John Singleton's extraordinary instinct for casting. Singleton wasn't checking birth certificates, he was looking for the soul of Furious Styles. The intelligence, the controlled strength, the gravitas. Fishburne delivered every single bit of it. His performance is so convincing that most viewers assume there's a realistic 15 to 20-year gap between the actors. Nobody does the math. The illusion is total, and that tells you everything about what great acting really is. But Fishburne and Cuba weren't the only pair with a surprising age dynamic. Another family had a situation that was even stranger and somehow even more believable on screen. Number 2. The mother was basically the same age as her sons. If the Furious Trey gap surprised you, the Baker family situation hits even harder. Tyra Ferrell played Mrs. Baker, the exhausted single mother showing devastating favoritism, pouring hope into Ricky while giving up on Doughboy. Her performance carries years of struggle and a particular grief that only comes from watching your own children drift toward destruction. Here's the reality underneath that performance. Tyra Ferrell was only 7 years older than Ice Cube and Morris Chestnut. Ice Cube was 21, Morris Chestnut was 22, Tyra Ferrell was 28. She was essentially playing the mother of men who were her contemporaries. If they'd crossed paths at a party, nobody would think twice. Instead, she was expressing decades of accumulated disappointment and delivering lines about how they'd failed her since they were children. Ferrell pulled it off through sheer emotional intelligence. When she tells Doughboy he's just like his father and will never amount to anything, you don't hear a mother having a bad day. You hear a woman who has said those words hundreds of times and long since stopped feeling guilty. She was 28 years old, making you believe all of that. One of the great unacknowledged acting achievements of the entire decade. There's also something unintentionally true about this casting. In communities where young parenthood is common, where violence shortens lives, the age distance between parents and children is often smaller than anywhere else. While the casting looks strange on paper, it quietly reinforces something real about the world the film portrays. What these first two facts reveal is that Singleton was making art, not a census report, but his commitment to authenticity went far beyond casting. If you are enjoying this, take 2 seconds and leave a like. Subscribe if you want more videos like this. That support really motivates my work and helps a lot with bringing more content. Number 3. The actor in the wheelchair was actually paralyzed in Boyz n the Hood. A character named Chris rolls through several scenes in a wheelchair, one of Doughboy's crew, a constant reminder of what gun violence does to human bodies. Most films fake this with able-bodied actors. Singleton did something different. He cast an actor named Rye Green who was actually paralyzed. Green was shot when he was 6 years old. Not on a set. In real life in Richmond, California, two neighbors got into a fight. One grabbed young Rye and used him as a human shield. The other opened fire. A bullet struck his spine, paralyzing him from the waist down. And just 2 hours after that shooting, his father died from a drug overdose. A 6-year-old lost his mobility and his father on the same afternoon. Green turned that weight into fuel. By 13, he was acting professionally, appearing in shows like Different Strokes and Highway to Heaven. By the time Singleton cast him, Green had both real credits and the lived reality of exactly what his character represented. His wheelchair wasn't a prop from the set department, it was his actual chair, the one he used every single day. When Chris sits quietly in scenes about violence and its aftermath, Green wasn't reaching for emotional memory, he was living it. That invisible layer of authenticity gives those scenes a weight no able-bodied actor could provide. His presence in this film wasn't just a casting choice, it was testimony. And bringing that kind of real trauma into the story also meant opening the door to real danger from people who felt their story was being told without permission. Number 4. Real gang members threatened to shoot Ice Cube. Singleton made a choice that separated his film from everything else Hollywood had produced about similar material. He filmed in the actual streets of South Central, not on a studio backlot, not in a cleaner neighborhood that could pass for it, the real territory. During production, members of the Bloods began making threats against Ice Cube. The trigger was a specific scene. Doughboy kills a Blood during a drive-by shooting. Local members watched this being filmed on their own turf and read it as the production taking sides in a conflict that was very real and very deadly. They felt the film was making the Crips look like winners and themselves like victims. And in that world, that kind of narrative has consequences. Gang members had direct conversations with crew members explaining that the portrayal was unacceptable. One member made clear that while he personally wasn't planning to act, he couldn't speak for everyone. The threat was credible enough that production had to change at least one filming location and adjust the shooting schedule entirely. The fact that Ice Cube came from Compton and had built a career on NWA's unflinching street commentary made things more complicated. Some felt he should have known better, that his credibility made the perceived disrespect worse. For most productions, this would have been the moment to retreat. Singleton refused. The streets weren't just background, they were part of the story itself. So instead of leaving, he brought in protection. Number 5, they filmed with a bulletproof van as cover. After the threats escalated and daily altercations on set became routine, the production positioned a van directly behind the camera crew during shoots. Not for equipment, not for shade. As bulletproof cover in case someone opened fire. Singleton confirmed this in his DVD commentary. After a particularly tense confrontation, the crew determined they needed a physical barrier between themselves and any potential gunfire. The van was parked so that cast and crew could drop behind it if shots were fired. Cuba Gooding Jr. later described fights breaking out every single day. Not occasionally, every single day. Think about the surreal nature of this situation. During the day, actors were pretending to shoot each other on camera. Between takes, the crew was preparing for the possibility of real people actually shooting them. The violence they were depicting and the violence surrounding them became dangerously hard to separate. Most directors would have gone home, but Singleton understood something that few filmmakers have the courage to act on. That daily fear, that constant threat. That was exactly what the film was about. The people who actually lived in those neighborhoods didn't get to retreat somewhere safe at the end of the day. By staying, Singleton forced his crew to feel even a fraction of that reality. You can feel that tension in every scene. It's not manufactured. It's there because the people making the movie were actually scared. But that commitment came with a serious technical cost that almost nobody realizes. Number 6. Helicopters and gunshots destroyed the sound. Here's a production nightmare that most viewers never consider. When you film in a neighborhood under constant police surveillance, in a community where gun violence was a near daily reality in the early 1990s, you cannot get clean audio. Police helicopters circled overhead almost constantly. South Central was under intense aerial surveillance, and local residents had stopped noticing them years ago. But for a film crew trying to record dialogue, those helicopters contaminated every take. And alongside them, actual gunshots. Not from the film. Real gunshots from real violence in the surrounding streets, bleeding directly into the audio. The result was that most of the film's dialogue had to be completely re-recorded in post-production through ADR, automated dialogue replacement. Every actor had to return after filming, sit in a studio, watch themselves on screen, and rebuild their performance in sync with their own lip movements. Recreating the emotion of a dangerous street scene from inside a recording booth is one of the harder things you can ask an actor to do. ADR is expensive, time-consuming, and creatively frustrating. It's exactly what productions try to avoid. But here's the layered truth. The things that destroyed their audio were the same things that gave the film its documentary texture. Those helicopters and those distant gunshots were the ambient soundtrack of life in that neighborhood. Singleton paid the price in ADR sessions because the alternative, filming somewhere quiet, would have stripped the film of its entire reason for existing. Number 7. It started as a film school application. Before Boyz n the Hood was an Oscar-nominated film, before it launched careers, and reshaped how Hollywood thought about black cinema. It was 3 paragraphs in a college application. When John Singleton applied to the USC School of Cinematic Arts, the application asked prospective students to describe film ideas they might want to make. Singleton submitted a concept originally called Summer of '84, a coming-of-age story set in South Central Los Angeles following young black men navigating friendship, violence, and a system that had already written them off. That idea got him admitted. Once enrolled, he developed it over years, deepening characters, sharpening the social commentary, until he graduated with a finished screenplay he believed in completely. He was 22 years old. Now imagine walking into Hollywood at 22 with a script about gang violence, single motherhood, police brutality, and systemic racism, and demanding full directorial control as a first-time filmmaker. Studios laughed. They wanted the script. They didn't want the director. Singleton refused every offer that separated him from his story. He understood Hollywood's long history of buying black narratives and then quietly softening them until they were something easier for mainstream audiences to swallow. Columbia Pictures eventually took the risk. They gave him a modest budget and the control he'd demanded. Singleton responded by becoming the youngest person ever nominated for Best Director at the Academy Awards and the first black filmmaker to receive that nomination. He was 24 years old at the ceremony, 5 years from a college application to Oscar history. Before we keep going, subscribe if you haven't yet. Drop a comment telling me which movie or show you want me to cover next with strange, behind-the-scenes facts. I read every single one. Number 8. The ending was inspired by Stand By Me. John Singleton studied films obsessively, always analyzing what worked and why. One technique he deliberately borrowed came from Rob Reiner's 1986 film, Stand By Me. In that film, the adult narrator reflects on his childhood friends, while the young version of himself slowly fades from the screen, a visual technique that communicates the irreversible passage of time in a way no amount of dialogue could match. Singleton rebuilt that tool for an entirely different emotional purpose. At the end of Boyz n the Hood, after Ricky's murder and the revenge killing, Doughboy sits alone in the alley with Trey. He talks about life and death with the quiet clarity of someone who already knows how his story ends. Then Ice Cube's character slowly fades from the frame as text appears revealing that Doughboy was murdered 2 weeks later. That visual disappearance paired with that information creates something devastating. We've watched him survive the entire film only to learn he barely outlasted it. The slow fade makes his death feel inevitable, already in motion while he was still talking. Stand By Me used that technique for bittersweet nostalgia. Boyz n the Hood uses the exact same device to produce grief and fury. Same tool, completely different emotional impact. That's not imitation, that's a filmmaker understanding why something works and bending it to serve his own story's needs. Number 9. Singleton appears as the mailman. Most director cameos are designed to be noticed. A quick walk past the camera, a moment clearly placed for sharp-eyed viewers. Singleton's is the opposite. It's so embedded in the natural flow of a scene that most people miss it entirely, even after multiple viewings. He appears as a postal worker delivering mail to the Baker family home. Full uniform, captive sunglasses. The scene he walks through is an emotionally charged confrontation between Doughboy and Ricky, while Ice Cube and Morris Chestnut are raw and intense. Singleton calmly crosses the frame, hands the mail to Mrs. Baker, and disappears. It's completely ordinary, and that ordinariness is the whole point. In real life, arguments don't pause for the world. The mail comes whether you're having the worst conversation of your life or not. That mundane interruption reinforces one of the film's central ideas. that people in these neighborhoods have to keep existing, keep functioning, keep moving through daily life, even under enormous pressure. But there's another layer. Mail delivery represents connection to opportunity, to something beyond the immediate circumstances. Singleton, who grew up in South Central and escaped through education and art, is literally carrying that possibility into the frame. It's subtle, layered, and entirely consistent with how he approached every single element of this film. Quick reminder to subscribe if you are enjoying these revelations. And tell me in the comments, do you know any strange fact about this movie that I didn't mention? Let's build the list together. Number 10. Ice Cube had zero acting experience. When Ice Cube was cast as Doughboy, he had never acted professionally. Not a student film, not a small TV role, nothing. He was a rapper, one of the voices behind NWA, famous for confrontational music about street life in Compton. Singleton cast him anyway, and this was a genuine gamble with enormous stakes. Boyz and the Hood was Singleton's one shot to prove himself. If Ice Cube's performance didn't hold up, the film's credibility would collapse. Singleton's career could have ended before it really started. Instead, Ice Cube gave one of the defining performances of 1990s American cinema. His Doughboy became iconic, dismissed by his mother, written off by society, but still fiercely human, still capable of unexpected loyalty and tenderness. That complexity required something technique couldn't manufacture. It required truth. Singleton understood that Ice Cube had lived close enough to Doughboy's experience to access something real. He didn't need to research the character. He needed to channel what was already there, the anger, the sense of being invisible to the people who should have seen you. That gamble launched an entire acting career. Friday, Three Kings. It all started with Singleton believing in someone when nobody else would. Number 11. Singleton was younger than several of his actors. Here's the fact that reframes everything else on this list. John Singleton was 23 years old when he directed Boyz and the Hood. Lawrence Fishburne was 29. Tyra Ferrell was 28. Ice Cube was nearly the same age as his director. Singleton was standing behind the camera, telling actors older than himself how to inhabit the most important performances of their early careers, while managing gang threats, daily fights on set, a bulletproof van, helicopters destroying his audio, and the full weight of an entire community's story on his shoulders. Most first-time directors spend years as assistants or in smaller roles before getting a feature. Singleton walked directly from film school into one of the most challenging productions of that decade. What gave him the confidence? Two things. First, he knew Hollywood's history of taking black stories away from black storytellers, buying them, softening them, reshaping them until they were unrecognizable. He was not letting that happen here. Second, he believed his perspective as someone who actually grew up in South Central gave him something no older, more experienced director could replicate. He was right, and the result proved it completely. Almost at the end, and the best is still coming. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this video is reaching. Bonus. The script won an award before the film existed, and now for the fact that almost nobody who discusses this film ever mentions, the one that recontextualizes the entire story. John Singleton didn't just pitch Boyz and the Hood as a college idea. He wrote the complete screenplay while still enrolled at USC. And before he ever walked into a studio meeting, before any actor was cast, before a single frame was shot, that script won the Robert Riskin Award for Best Screenplay at USC, a student award given to a student, for a script that would become one of the most important American films of the 1990s. Think about what that means. The dialogue that feels so authentic it could have been recorded directly on those streets was written by a 21-year-old film student. The characters that feel so lived in and irreplaceable were built in a classroom. The social commentary that still resonates 30 years later was shaped as an academic exercise. When Hollywood tried to buy the script and take Singleton out of the process, they didn't realize they were trying to separate the film from its own source. The screenplay wasn't a product created to sell. It was documentation. His neighborhood, his people, his generation, rendered on the page with the precision of someone who had been preparing to tell this story his entire life. The fact that it began in school, that it was recognized as extraordinary before a single industry decision had been made about it, is a quiet reminder that the most important stories don't start in boardrooms. Sometimes they start with a 21-year-old who has something real to say and the skill and the stubbornness to say it exactly the way it needs to be said. And those were 12 strange, true facts about Boyz n the Hood, a film that should not have existed the way it did. Directed by a 23-year-old, starring a rapper who'd never acted, filmed in streets where the crew needed bulletproof cover, and built on a script that started as a college assignment and won an award before anyone in Hollywood had read it. Every layer you peel back reveals something more remarkable. 3 decades after its release, Boyz n the Hood still hits with the force of something that was never softened or processed. That's not an accident. It's the direct result of every refusal Singleton made to let someone else direct his story, to film somewhere safer, to cast more conventionally, to compromise any piece of the vision. If you made it this far, leave a like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me which fact surprised you the most. And don't forget to suggest another film that deserves a list like this one. See you in the next video.